Good day or evening, wherever you may be. We should probably get started with this installment of Ibogaine Insights from Beyond. And my name is Tom Fiegel. I am here on behalf of Beyond to welcome our special guest to a program we call Ibogaine Insights, where we discuss with renowned authorities and thought leaders in psychedelic assisted therapies the issues related to therapy for trauma and addiction. This is curated largely for practitioners and professionals to really understand the clinical aspects and benefits of Ibogaine assisted therapy. But on days like today, we talk about Ibogaine and other psychedelics. It's a 60-minute session. We hope that this is both enjoyable and insightful, and that the material we present is helpful in the development of clinical care and the assessment, treatment qualification, and enables more people to experience the benefits that we discuss here today and better understand the methods and approaches for delivering them. So as we get started, I'd like to welcome our guests, starting with Dr. Lynnette Averill. Would you kindly introduce yourself, Net? I know you go by Net, but welcome. It's great to see you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much, Tom, for the invitation to participate. I'm really happy to be here to talk about Ibogaine and other psychedelic treatment in the treatment of trauma, and always delighted and honored to be able to spend some time with my dear friends and colleagues, Andrew and Ethan. So it's really a great opportunity for me. By way of introduction, I am a associate professor at Baylor College of Medicine. I am a psychologist, a research psychologist at the VA. I am an owner and senior psychologist of a consulting and private practice business, Insight PLLC. Work with Reason for Hope that does a lot of policy and advocacy work in the psychedelic medicine space. And I suppose very relevant to this work, something else that I will share and often share is that I am the daughter of a US Marine who died by suicide when I was 3 years old after struggling for years with ineffective treatments. And I feel in many ways that I've been involved in this space broadly most of my life, growing up, just very aware of the effects of stress and trauma on the individual who experiences it themselves, as well as on the family, the friends, the community who really experience so much of these things in tandem. And related to psychedelic medicine was, my mother was very open, and I would hear stories of her and some of my parents' friends talking about experiences with psychedelic medicine. My parents met in Northern California after my dad got home from the war, and I would hear stories of them using psychedelic medicine, and these stories just struck me as so wildly different from the stories that I would hear either from some of my older cousins, older kids I knew about alcohol, other sorts of drugs, et cetera, that they weren't about getting high, they weren't about having fun, they weren't about these sorts of things, but they were about finding yourself again, finding connection, connecting with yourself and your identity, perhaps pieces of yourself that have been lost, connecting with other people, with nature, with the divine in whatever shape or form that may make. Certainly for many of them, it was about trying to make sense out of what they saw to be a senseless war, any of these kinds of things. And so sort of had that floating around in the back of my head, and as I progressed through undergrad and grad school and really became very aware of the stark reality of the treatments that we have available for PTSD and really for stress and trauma related concerns broadly, depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts and behaviors, addictive behaviors, any of these things, we on the one hand, I will not minimize that we have come an incredibly long way, and things like SSRIs are vital to our toolbox. For some people, they do work well and are life-saving, and unfortunately, for so many people, they are just not enough. They have never been enough, and I think as we move forward, kind of day by day, issues of chronic stress and trauma are really mounting. And we know that SSRIs especially are pretty wildly ineffective for individuals with chronic stress and trauma. And as we look around, we find ourselves now a little over 20 years past 9/11. We had that anniversary last year, 20 years of sustained combat. We have approximately 20 veterans dying a day by suicide. And it's unfortunately not only a veteran issue. We have, suicide epidemic and opioid epidemic. And that was our baseline as a country and really as a world before we found ourselves now almost 2 years, 2.5 years into a globally shared stressor and traumatic experience of the COVID pandemic and everything that has brought with it. No matter what side of politics or other things you fall on in relation to the pandemic, it has been an incredibly stressful number of years related to that, related to social, civil, political unrest, related to the withdrawal from Afghanistan, now the war in Ukraine, all of these things. I don't know that probably if we ask ourselves, no one is unaffected at this point. No one has been unaffected for quite a while. And I think people really, really are realizing that what we have is not enough. And that psychedelic medicine, in my opinion, really is the new yet ancient frontier of psychiatry, that there is so much potential here that we're starting to tap into. In terms of my work there, and I will wrap this up and then chat further as the conversation goes. I did my fellowship at Yale in the National Center for PTSD in my early faculty appointment and did a lot of research, a lot of pharmacoimaging trials in ketamine, and then got involved in psychedelic medicine as it was becoming a bit more mainstream and acceptable, if you will, to really acknowledge that that's what you were interested in studying. So have done a lot of work now in that space, both doing research actually with Special Operations Forces veterans who have left the United States, the country that they sacrificed and served for, leaving the United States to go engage in often a life-saving treatment, engaging in Ibogaine and 5-MeO treatment with really transformational experiences. And then, as I mentioned, have in the last year been very involved in advocacy and policy work, including serving as a subject matter expert for Texas, who passed House Bill 1802 and had the opportunity to actually testify with Andrew. And that funds a clinical trial of psilocybin for veterans with PTSD. So have a lot of work going on that front. There are many other things that I look forward to discussing and saying, but I will wrap it up there and hear from Andrew and Ethan.
Thank you so much, Net. There's so much that you said that we get to go back to and unpack, and I really appreciate it. I want to welcome two other very special guests, Andrew Marr, a retired Special Forces Green Beret and co-founder of Warrior Angels Foundation and best-selling co-author of Tales from the Blast Factory, a brain-injured Special Forces Green Beret's journey back from the brink. Talk about a great title for a book. I can't wait to hear more about that. And Ethan Abend, a former New York Police Department detective who was medically retired after an on-duty building explosion. Ethan, Andrew, thank you very much for being here. Tell us a little bit about your story, your background, Andrew, if you would.
Yeah. I'll just kind of give a high-level overview, and hopefully we can get into more specific questions if the participants have any. So like you said, my background was in Army Special Forces, served for the better part of a decade. All my entire active career was in combat every year that I was in the service. So to be proficient in anything, you have to develop that skill. You develop that skill by doing things over and over and over and over again. So one of my specialties was with explosives, demolitions, and that of what we call an explosive breacher. So what that entails is that you put a surgical explosive charge on some area that's denied that you want to get into. So that could be a door, a wall, window, something of that nature. And then you get back to what we call a safe minimum distance. We blow that charge, and then we go into the denied area to start doing our work. And so, I was literally in close proximity to thousands of blasts over my career, and that's not special to me. That's just part of the training. And as counterintuitive as it might sound, it never dawned on us that could have a negative effect on the brain. And sure enough, the data is coming out now. It's pretty clear. But what that evolved into, Tom, was a high functioning, high performing individual, high level of intelligence, physically gifted, going from that end of the spectrum, and then without a physical injury, not a scratch on my body, not missing an eye, a limb, or anything else, to being completely unrecognizable from my everyday self, to being forced to be medically retired from the Army, labeled with 30 plus disabilities. Every every mood disorder in the book was hung on me. It's put on a double-digit medications and said, hey, good luck with the rest of your life, but we can't use your highly developed skill set anymore. And here's this bag of medication to help you as you walk out the door. And so, that didn't stop the downward spiral. It was kind of the start. And but like so many of us, I hit rock bottom. And when I got to the bottom, I realized that in the condition that I was in, I wasn't going to be able to be who I needed to be, which at that point was a husband and a father. So at the same time, I'm dealing with the loss of identity, having my health taken away, having the thing that I thought I was put on earth to do taken away. Kind of fighting through that. And so it was at that bottom that I decided that, I'm going to get better, because these people are counting on me, and that was something to cling to. So that really took me from one line of time into another, started to look for different treatment modalities that were alternative to what I had experienced, what we'll call the military industrial medical complex, and which in my case was psychotherapy and medication, which didn't do anything to identify the underlying symptoms. It just kind of exacerbated all problems. So that led me on a long path to all these different alternative modalities, found things that were extremely effective for me. We built up a whole nonprofit foundation around that. And it was through that led to my discovery of psychedelic assisted therapy, which was really on accident. By the time I first encountered my first psychedelic experience, which was in 2016, I was already symptom and medication free, and I was performing as good as I thought I could perform. But being an advocate for veterans, health, I felt it was the right thing to do to experience these substances. And what I encountered on that first experience, and mine was with 5-MeO DMT, was the most profound impact, profound experience of my life. And we can delve into that a little bit further, but that changed the way that it changed how I understand the structure of reality. All my paradigms were crushed in the most beneficial of ways, and a 15-minute experience in linear time was something from which a new person emerged for a higher and a better good. And I was already on a path of doing the best I could. So I understood the phenomenal healing capabilities of these molecules, of these substances. And since then, we've played a prominent role of help setting up that kind of underground railroad, if you will, out of the country into Mexico or other places to get individuals this level of care who need it. And since then, like Lynnette said, we've been working very, very adamantly about state legislation and federal legislation as well to make these molecules readily available in a clinical aspect to anybody who we think could benefit from it. So yeah, there's a strategy and a way to move that forward, and we're actually, you know, actualizing that. But that's kind of the end state, that in a clinically safe, protected environment where we can regulate the molecules themselves and how they're administered, and that we can have efficacy there. And there's a good program that prepares you for the experience, the actual experience. And then as important as the prep work is the back end work. And that's the integration experience. So anyways, I'll ramble on and on and on, Tom. That's my high level, kind of where I'm at. And I'm just honored to come here and hopefully provide value to the participants.
Thank you. Well, listen, your story, like Lynnette's, is so meaningful and so interesting. And there's so much there. I can't wait for us to get back to it. I mean, I heard a key phrase there, the accidental discovery. We can talk about access. We can talk about the delivery model, the experience, safety. There's so much there. But before we do, Ethan Abend, tell us a little bit about your background, your personal experience and experience of psychedelic assisted therapy and the benefits thereof, if you would. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Tom, and it's great to be here. And it's really an honor and a privilege for me to be able to share my story. So thank you all for being here and allowing me this space. I'm a retired NYPD detective. I was in a unit that I was trying to get into my entire career. It was the SWAT rescue unit for the NYPD, and it was my goal in my professional career to get there and to excel there. And I did manage to do that. And in 2016, we were called to a drug house or marijuana grow house / drug house, and that exploded. And me and my partner were injured, and another member of the responding team was killed. So I suffered TBI, traumatic brain injury, and that set this all in motion for me. I went to various therapies, talk therapies, drug therapies, even alternative therapies, if you will. And they didn't touch what was wrong with me. And similar to other stories, I had lost, in my mind, I had lost everything that I had worked for, that I had known, and everything that I had identified with was now gone. So there were multiple layers of this loss. There was the physical injuries that I had sustained, and there were the long-lasting emotional injuries that I had sustained. And I was desperate for help because the medications that they had me on weren't touching what I needed, but weren't addressing my real needs. And in May of last year, I was desperate. And similar to Andrew, I had stumbled onto a study of special forces that had traveled out of the country to get treatment with psychedelics. And at that point, I had gone off all of my medications because the medications that I was on were giving me severe side effects. And the side effects were unbearable. I don't know how to quantify how unbearable as compared to my emotional needs not being met, but they were definitely a consideration. And to be in constant physical pain in addition to emotional pain was very challenging. So I happened to be, I don't know how I stumbled on it, but I stumbled on this study that was conducted, and Dr. Averill was one of the lead researchers on this. And having read her bio, well, having seen the study done, I knew that there was hope. at the very least, I needed to try this because of the results of that study were astounding. I mean, the numbers were jumping off the page. So on just a whim, I didn't know if I would get a hold of her. It was just some stranger emailing somebody across the world or across the U.S. and probably went to her junk folder, which it did. But she responded, and having read her bio, the reason why I had emailed her and not anybody else in this study was because just her heart seemed to be in it for real reasons. And I knew there'd be a connection, or I hoped there would be a connection. And she responded. She checked her junk folder a couple of days later. And she was kind and caring and vested in my well-being, and she didn't know me at that time. And I then was put in touch with some other people that had done this treatment. And due to my head injury, I couldn't get on a plane to fly where I needed to go. So I got in a car, I rented a car, and I drove for 3 days to the middle of the country. And I met with therapists who I had been in contact with for a month before, and very caring and loving and nurturing and skilled therapists. And on May 13th of last year, I was a different person. After that evening of May 13th, I had a view of myself and my experiences and my trauma that I didn't have prior to that. And yes, I was in therapy for years prior to May 13th, and all of those things perhaps might have been said to me, but to me, to actually experience that firsthand in the first person was extremely powerful, and not just powerful. It was a monumental change in the way I saw myself and the way I interacted with my family, and it didn't just improve my life, but when I came home from that drive, if you will, I walked in the door, and my 7-year-old son said to me, and he didn't know where I went. My wife, she might have said I might have gone somewhere for treatment or what have you. But he said to me, "Daddy, you look softer." And that was just such a pure observation from someone who was not prepped by anything or anybody. Just to recognize that immediately when I walked through the door was so heartwarming, that I could have that immediate impact, not just for myself and my life, but the people that are closest to me and the people that live with me. So that began really my journey of healing, which I'm still on, and my story is still being told, thankfully, and didn't end in May of last year, and didn't end in 2018. And I'm here to experience the full range of emotions that I wasn't experiencing prior. I had really numbed everything, and I wasn't listening to all of those cues. And now I can listen to myself, and I can do the self-care that I need, and not ignore all of the things that my body is telling me to do. So I'm truly blessed to be here. I'm truly blessed to have met Dr. Averill, and that she reached out with her kindness, and that I met the people that I eventually journeyed with, if you will, with the psilocybin. I'm truly blessed to be here and share my story. And there's a lot more to this if anybody's interested, but I'm happy to share. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What a beautiful story. As a parent, I could really feel that experience that you told me about that now 8-year-old, probably. But we're really getting into it now, and I wanted to ask one particular question. So I'm Tom Fiegel. I'm CEO of a company called Beyond, BEOND, and I'm coming to you from our facility here in Mexico, where we offer psychedelic assisted therapies for trauma, for depression, anxiety, trauma, and substance use disorder, and combinations thereof. But I wanted to ask a question based on my own experience as well to you, Dr. Averill. We see people all the time that have extensive experience with conventional therapy. and have seen some benefits, of course. But there seems to be some level of a plateau or some declining effects. Lots of different efforts, lots of different modalities, and not really the breakthroughs that we're hearing about from Andrew and Ethan. If you could help us really understand from your perspective, what is it about the effects of Ibogaine or other psychedelic assisted therapies that are so different? How are they working to achieve the outcomes that these gentlemen are describing?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I think that's an exceptional question, and certainly one of the things that I think we know a bit about, and certainly I and many others are very excited to continue studying. I think a lot of what we see with our traditionally available interventions is that if you happen to be, I'll say, one of the lucky ones, if you happen to be an individual who generally has a good support system, who has a nice amount of resources, financial resources, other resources, you can access care, you are not overly marginalized in some way, whether that is due to race, to sex, to social economic status, to any number of other factors, to disability, anything. SSRIs and talk therapy can provide really sometimes transformational sorts of experiences. There certainly are benefits to be had there. The challenge is, though, that for so many people, that is not the case. So much of mental health happens in the context of significant comorbidities in terms of having depression and anxiety and suicidal thoughts and behaviors, and engaging in some sort of addictive behaviors to try to either self-medicate those symptoms or to kind of fill in other things that seem to be missing, whether that is trying to accommodate for social insecurities or for loneliness or for a sense of worth or any of these things. I think as Dr. Gabor Mate had commented on, that often the addictive behaviors people engage in, while of course they can be problematic in and of themselves and often are, that simply treating the addiction itself without actually exploring why are we engaging in this behavior, what purpose does it serve, and how can we otherwise remedy that, is such a missing component. And where there is the chronic stress and trauma, whether that is that you are in a marginalized lifestyle somehow, again, due to race, to sex, to SES, to disability, to whatever those factors may be, or certainly, as I think we all could attest, living day by day with PTSD, depression, TBI, chronic pain, that shift in identity or that loss of identity, and all of the things that come with that, the changes in sleep, the changes in family dynamics, the changes in your sense of capacity to work or be productive in meaningful ways. Any of those things are a chronic stress and trauma in and of themselves. That is a really challenging way to go through life. And neurobiologically, there is sort of this vicious cycle that happens where there are shifts in all sorts of neurochemicals. There are shifts in BDNF and cortisol and inflammation markers and all of these things. And it just very quickly becomes too much for things like SSRIs, and often even for very skilled therapists with great expertise to really be able to get through enough of that, to really be able to break down those barriers. I think, Andrew, is your job as a Green Beret, as sort of as an example, if I'm trying to break down a wall, a literal wall, and have nothing but little teeny pebbles to throw at it, I am going to be there trying to break down that wall a really long time. And I think the thing that is really exciting about Ibogaine and other psychedelics is not only are they generally more powerful, they're a bit more of a intensive experience. They are that because they have so much more effect on neurobiology broadly. SSRIs generally are targeting serotonin. SSRIs, of course, are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Some other antidepressants we have do target some of the other monoaminergic neurochemicals, whether that's dopamine, norepinephrine, et cetera. But the other thing that happens with SSRIs is that they are slow acting. So meaning that they take weeks to months to actually reach clinical benefit. So there again, to me, that just feels so wildly unacceptable. The reality of that when someone is struggling and we really say, well, you know, hold tight for 4 to 8 weeks. And if you don't feel better, we'll start you over again at ground zero. And then if you don't feel better after another 2 months there, we'll start over again and again and again. During that period, you may lose or gain 20 pounds. You might have a lot of cognitive impairment. You might not be able to perform sexually. Might actually feel worse, but hang tight, you know, we'll keep trying. That's an awful reality. Psychedelic medicine, Ibogaine, for example, targets serotonin, dopamine, both transporters as well as the receptors, targets opioid receptors, which of course is why it seems to be so effective specifically for opioid addiction, but also targets things like BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is one of the kind of neurochemicals most repeatedly that comes up in trauma-related PTSD-based neurobiological research. That when that is altered, everything can kind of go a bit sideways neurobiologically. And it targets these things very rapidly and very robustly. From the idea of neurobiological functional connectivity in the brain, you know, sort of how our brain communicates with each other, how we process information, how we store our memories and experiences, any of those things. It is thought that Ibogaine and other psychedelics really target MDMA as well, which NMDA, sorry, not MDMA, NMDA, which relates to glutamate, synaptic plasticity, these sorts of things, specifically in 3 brain regions, one of which is the salience network, which tells our brains, which tells us, what are the things that we pay attention to? Where do we focus our attention? Where are the threats and dangers? Which, of course, with trauma and stress, that's amped up. That's on high alert. It's possible everything feels like a threat. Everything is a danger. Everyone is a danger. We can't trust others, right? The central executive network, which is that higher order planning and problem solving, thinking through consequences, not being impulsive, but sort of weighing pros and cons, all of these things. There again, with stress and trauma, that gets a little wonky, goes offline a bit. That's why people sometimes will act very impulsively and then regret decisions they've made, these sorts of things. And the last is the default mode network. And the default mode network is that piece of our brain that actually is most active when we are not cognitively or emotionally engaged in other things. The challenge with PTSD, for example, and depression and other things, is that often there isn't that kind of checkout, that daydream. You just stare at the wall and don't really think of anything, because there's always those little voices, always those little thoughts in the back of your head of either past traumatic experiences or other sorts of things. And there's research that shows most of this has been specifically in psilocybin to date, but I suspect we will find very similar things with Ibogaine when we're able to start doing these imaging studies, that the psychedelics very, again, rapidly and robustly shift all of that neurobiology and specifically the connectivity there to where you have the experience of, I think, Andrew, you said something about feeling like your reality was crushed, I believe, or reality was shattered. And though I can imagine on the one hand that feels very terrifying, perhaps for some people hearing that, I think on the other hand that is sometimes really where the magic happens, if you will, that having that entire actual opportunity to disconnect, to reset, to sort of quite literally have your brain rewiring things, giving you an opportunity to reorganize, to reevaluate, to sort of restructure things, evaluate your beliefs, all of these things gives you so much insight, which I think both of you really beautifully commented on, this experience of new insights that you really did not have before these experiences, that you come away after such a short period of time with this wildly new perspective on yourself, on where you fit into the world, on your connection to other people, any of these things, and that all has neurobiological underpinnings. For many people, that also is going to come in tandem with a very powerful spiritual experience of some kind, or a mystical experience. Certainly when we think about trauma, and I suppose the human experience generally, for many people, that is a critical component that either has been a very important role, or again, that they feel like they've lost connection with. Trauma often influences one's perception of divinity, of God, of goodness, of any of those things. And I think the rapid acting and robust acting across so many different neurochemicals in such a profound way is really what we see. And again, for the chronic stress and trauma, I think is really what we need. That's where we see these significant improvements.
Wow, thank you. I mean, again, I think we need more time for all of these meetings for many reasons. It's fascinating, it's important, it's exciting, but I would like to throw it back to Andrew for just a moment and ask you, Andrew, about the experience itself. The experience that you had of that, it's so interesting because what I heard you talk about, and I heard Ethan also amplify in his own way, was this first losing everything that you had been trained to do, this inability to be qualified for what you had been trained to do. And now a sense of purpose, like a incredible alignment with a sense of purpose. And I would just love to hear more and share with our guests that experience itself. How does that happen for you in relationship to the psychedelic assisted therapy that you benefited from?
I've experienced. I would call myself somewhat experienced in the realm of psychedelics and psychedelic assisted therapy, but again, my first encounter was in August 6th of 2016. And I didn't come from a background that knew anything about psychedelics. It was pretty neutral. It just wasn't a thing. And people I trusted on multiple occasions told me about it and said they had, or seen these profound impacts, and thought I could benefit from it. And one of them being a medical doctor that I really respected, Navy SEAL. And so I was like, well, I'll give it a go. And, the way that I went about it, I wouldn't recommend for anybody else, but it worked for me. And so without any really knowledge of what I was getting into, I had a, underground facilitation of 5-MeO DMT. All right. So it was through the actual venom of the toad. And I inhaled that, right? And then fell back on my back. And it felt as if I was literally strapped to a rocket and it was launched. And that was the absolute speed that I felt that as I was moving. And I thought for sure that I was going to die, that was an unsustainable pace, and kind of stuck in the state where I wasn't really sure what to do. And I think I was able to revert back to my training, get some presence of mind, start, focusing on my breath. And I was able to ride that out, and I popped through. Okay. When I say pop through, I realize now, like, I was going through everything that I knew, everything then that I knew that I did not know. And then I popped through a space where I was aware that, oh my, I didn't even know this was a thing. And I found myself there. And what happened next was I started to relive past experiences, but as if they were happening in real time. And I was, there was something shifting through. All my memories were held in these like glass memory games, or like floppy disks, and it was like rolling through it like a Rolodex. And it was an internal non-verbal communication, but it'd be like, no, not that one, not that one, not that one. It would come to an image on that floppy disk in the Rolodex, and then it would be like, yep, that one. And then boom, I'm in that experience as if it's happening in real time, except it is, I'm from a higher plane of awareness. And what I mean by that is I'm not looking at it through my eyes at that time. I'm seeing it from more of a 360-degree perspective, where not only do I kind of understand what I was going there, but I kind of had this, in this elevated state, I have an understanding of how that affected everybody that was in that 360-degree radius. All right. So what I was able to do was process things in my subconscious that I didn't even know were a problem, but it allowed me to identify it, to confront it, and to repurpose that for a higher meaning. Whereas before it was stuck in a pattern, which was a lower meaning. And what's a lower meaning? Something that wasn't beneficial to my life. And it was manifesting as some pattern that was in my life that I was consciously unaware of. All right, so subconscious program. And so there was a number of those, all combat related. And I got to work through those experiences. I got to talk with the dead. I got to speak with their parents. And there was that, just beautiful symphony of working through those experiences. And then it came like phases. So the next phase was like, after that work, was tended to, I then absolved into a state of pure awareness. All right. It was, outside of time and space. I was aware of I became aware to the interconnectedness of all life, that I wasn't separate from it, that I was a part of it, that it was connected, that there was no, at that point, there was no identity, there was no self. It was just this state of, and not non-physical, of just absolute being, absolute awareness, unmanifest. And with that, Tom, came this indescribable feeling of intelligent love, is the only way that I can attempt to put a word behind it. But it was unlike anything that I had ever experienced before in my life. And it was the most beautiful, it was the most sublime, it was divine. And so to be in that state, and then, I was able to come back to my body. And when you wake up from something like that, at least in my experience, you're not the same anymore. And that was absolutely the same. That was absolutely the case with me. What it gave me was a higher level of understanding. And really my understanding is that, hey, unbeknownst to us, we have things that are downloaded into our subconscious, and that comes out as programs. And oftentimes we're running these programs that aren't beneficial to us. We would never consciously choose them. And we would never consciously want to choose those. We would never want to affect people in this manner, or react in this manner, or choose to do life in this manner. And what it gave me at that moment was, or opened up my eyes to the fact that I could now become conscious of those programs, and I could choose whether or not I would enact them or I would not enact them. So, went to victim or victor. At that moment, I chose to be the victor, and I wasn't going to fall victim to these programs anymore. And that was all information that came to me through myself and just working through the process. And now, being on the other side of it and helping others, I can say it's a universal phenomena that we see time and time and time again. And like I said just a second ago, when you go through an experience like that, you're not the same in the most beneficial and positive way. And so, Tom, that was probably the best way I could wrap it up.
That was so beautiful. I love that sense of clarity, that real timeness, that sense of awareness that you touched on so many times, awareness of awareness, meta awareness, and ultimately that sense of choice that comes out of that experience. It sounds very much like what we witness here at Beyond. We call it insight-oriented Ibogaine for a reason, because people are learning a lot in this process, and it yields that sense of choice and that the ability to be self-motivated in the healing experience. And want to reach back out to Ethan and ask you, Ethan, about your experience of this same or similar pattern of the feeling of actually the healing itself, and what about the environment or the assistance or the therapeutic guidance that you had that helped cultivate that sense of your own involvement in the process of healing from something that was so profoundly challenging up until that time?
Thank you. I think some of my experiences, and Andrew put it really succinctly and probably better than I can. But I think to address your last question was, I had the benefit of being so desperate, and luckily I fell in the lap of truly amazing people, and caring people, and people that made me feel safe when I had a hard time feeling anything at that point, but made me feel safe being vulnerable and made me feel safe enough to do the work that I needed to do. And that was paramount, I think, in hindsight, that I landed in the right place with the right people. In regards to the preparation and the integration, I really am blessed in that regard. In terms of my experience, I think the entire experience, I don't think I can put it as well as Andrew, but it gave me a look at myself, a perspective of myself that I didn't see. The blind sides I couldn't access through therapy or through traditional medications, or even some non-traditional treatment things that I pursued. But it gave me a view of my blind spots, and it allowed me to see myself in a way that I couldn't trust somebody if they told me that, no, you are doing this, or this is something you might want to consider for your healing. It had to be lived and viewed through my eyes, or at least, yes, from my perspective. And that's what that gave me. It gave me a chance for self-forgiveness, for self-love, just building such fundamental things as that. It really gave me an opportunity to see myself in that light, and to be able to start a healing process that I wasn't even aware that was possible. I wasn't aware that some of the healing I needed done was needed, to be quite honest. And once that experience allowed me to start feeling again, and to start accessing the self-love that was buried underneath so much trauma, pain, it opened up me being able to feel again, and me being able to feel again allowed me to connect with myself. And once I connected with myself and listened to myself and listened to the self-care that I needed and the cues that my body was giving me and my emotions and my brain were telling me, I was finally starting to listen again, and allowed me to connect with people that I love, people that are in my immediate circle. And it's not always happy feelings, but it's even I was discussing this earlier, even the feelings of sadness or challenging feelings, those are still opportunities for me to connect to people. And that really fills a real void for someone that went through trauma, for someone who doesn't feel understood, and for someone who wasn't even connecting or understanding themselves. So it opened up that wide range of emotions for me, which I'm truly blessed to have. I don't know if that answered your question, Tom.
I think it more than answers my question, Ethan. And what's so striking about what you said and what Andrew said is so beautifully, articulately, is that it's obviously a very intellectually stimulating experience with a lot of insights, a lot of awareness, a lot of clarity. But where it seems to land is in the heart, and a sense of self-love and empathy and the love of a human experience, really deeply, an experience that's deeply rooted in your own human experience, not just for yourself, but that you can see in others as a result of this, which is so remarkable. I mean, I have been in therapy for most of my life, and you know, I've had some wonderful breakthroughs and had some wonderful, just extraordinary therapists that have helped me through trauma, through addiction, but not at the pace that we're talking about, where there's such a profound shift and an enduring shift that can then be put to work in the way that you guys are describing. So thank you for that. I see that we have, and as I said before, I'm so sorry all the time that each time that we do this, that we run out of time, but such is the nature of these events. But I did see that two of our attendees had their hands up, Jennifer Egloff and Denise Joseph. If you would be so kind as to post your question in the chat, we'd be delighted to invite our panelists to make their best effort to answer them. So while we're waiting for that, Dr. Averill, where's this going? I know it sounds like we're on the threshold of, as you put it, I'll paraphrase, an ancient innovation, ancient technology with a new innovative breakthrough for psychiatry. And but what is it about where we are that is causing the barrier to access to something that seems so profoundly relevant and meaningful, potentially to so many people?
That is a very big question.
Well,
you've
got 2 minutes roughly, but take your time.
I think there's a lot of things at play here. On the positive side, though positive is perhaps not the most appropriate word here, I think that we have a bit of a unique moment in time, a unique moment in history here that unfortunately is a moment of crisis. In my opinion, we are in a state of a mental health crisis unlike anything that we have dealt with before as a nation, and quite, I think, as a species. The rates of significant mental health concerns across all ages are really profound, and the treatments that are mainstream are not enough. We know that they are not enough, and enough people now are really desperate for something that works, that I think as a field, the advocates of psychedelic medicine are gaining a bit of traction because there is so much desperation. So I think in terms of moving things forward, that is very positive. That is our reality, of course, is not positive. Psychedelic medicine has a very interesting and I think very unfortunate history, certainly within the United States, where there was really promising research happening in the 50s and 60s. It was suggesting there were a lot of medical uses for this, for depression, addiction, pain, end of life, anxiety, all of these things. And then, the Controlled Substances Act happened and sort of shut down all of that. Conversation for another day, but the Controlled Substances Act was 99% purely a political move, rather than having significant evidence that most of these are, wildly unsafe in some way, or these sorts of things. I certainly would agree that things did go a bit off the rails. It was a bit the Wild West in the late 60s and 70s in terms of psychedelic medicine use. But in terms of putting these all as Schedule 1 was not the appropriate path forward there, in my opinion. And so we're sort of having to rail against a very strong history that is based in politics, that for some people is based in religious faith and any of these things, which those are often relatively hard to move. The other thing that's very interesting about these particular medicines is that they are ancient. They are not something new that, any of us have created in a pharmaceutical lab somewhere in the last 5 years. Psilocybin, iboga, all of these things have been used by various communities for millennia and are now being adopted into a westernized medicine format. At least in the US, psilocybin and MDMA are currently going through the formal FDA process. They have the breakthrough therapy indications. And some of the challenges that we're running into as a field broadly, and when I say that, I mean sort of not just psychiatry, neuroscience, any of these things, but sort of as a whole, I suppose the better is that we're running into in a society is sort of that balance point between caring for the good of humanity and caring for the good of capitalism. And what I mean by that is that there are a lot of groups that are trying to figure out how to best monetize these things, monetize these molecules, use only synthetic, have these broad patents, any of those things, which then really significantly limits accessibility and equity in terms of who would be able to engage in these interventions. And so you sort of have these people on both sides of the fence. I think, certainly Andrew and Ethan and I have been involved in some of these conversations about how do we support safe, responsible, ethical, accessible, and equitable use for all who need it. And then there are, unfortunately, some groups who are saying, how do we protect these so that we can best monetize them? Which, conversation for another day. That I personally think it's highly unfortunate that there is that sense of caring more for the bottom line than the good of humanity and ultimately saving lives in a lot of cases. I think, though, not only is there the momentum, there's also really strong research support. We have the scientific evidence to back this up. It is not just, the anecdotal reports of people saying that these are safe, that they're effective, any of these things, but that controlled trials are showing the same thing. So I think that we are very much on the fast track. Things are shifting. hopefully within the next couple of weeks, there will be an announcement about some really big things happening at a federal level that would hopefully help to shift this a bit. There's a lot of conversations happening in many states with many organizations like Andrew's and others that are trying to push these things forward. And I think we're on the right path. I think we are on the right path. And I do think, Tom, opportunities like this for people to come together and share their experiences, share the science, ask questions, and just generally build awareness and really talk about issues of safety and other things is also a critical thing to continue to move things forward in a useful and productive way.
Totally agree. And talk about a cliffhanger, Dr. Averill. In a couple of weeks, a major announcement on a federal level that will shift things.
Well, I mean, maybe shift things. Maybe shift things.
But any effort to broaden access to this type of experience that is of interest to people who are truly suffering, who are truly interested, or frankly, curious. It sounds like the discoveries that Ethan and Andrew are describing are worthy of early intervention to find out, is this therapeutic approach for me, is a reason enough for someone to experience this in a safe environment.
Yeah.
As we begin to wrap up, Ethan, would you help us understand your perspective on the work that you're doing or you believe should be done to broaden the access to safe, ethical, and medically administered psychedelic assisted therapy?
Yeah, and I'm happy to answer that. And you mentioned, I stumbled upon this by accident, and I think Andrew mentioned similarly that he stumbled upon it. And imagine the multitudes of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who have not stumbled upon anything of this nature. And even if they did, do they have the means, the financial means, the time, the emotional means to do this work? I had the gift of desperation as it was put to me. I was desperate for anything, so I was all in. I was in this 110%. And I had, thankfully, the financial means and the time to pursue this. But what about all those people that don't have the means or the access or the funds? So thankfully, I've had the opportunity, I've been blessed to do some telling my story to people who listen, be it legislators locally on a state level, or even more local than that, to departments where the stigma of mental health is really still very much alive. It's not, I mean, some of us are still in the 50s when it comes to mental health and the needs that people have beyond their physical bodies. So I've been blessed to have that opportunity, and that's given me a real sense of purpose to further that, to kick that ball down the road, and to really hopefully impact people with the changes that are possible. But as Dr. Averill said, the perception out there and the accessibility, I think, is, and just having these conversations are instrumental, I think, in just spreading the word. And it's not for everybody. I don't think it's safe for everybody, and I don't think it's just like other medications aren't, but at least let it be an option for people, because there are so many people that are so desperate, and there are so many suicides, as what we all know, and there are so many people living with horrendous trauma and pain day to day without any kind of respite. So it's an honor to have been here to tell my story.
I appreciate that very much. And I want to ask you a similar question, Andrew. So you're doing a lot of work to both share your story, and I think, first of all, thank you for that. It's so inspiring on so many levels, both of you and Dr. Averill as well. Your personal story, your research, your ability to help professionals and prospective beneficiaries understand how this works and why it works for certain conditions better than others is extremely valuable and inspiring to be a part of the conversation for me, and I'm deeply appreciative. Thank you for that. Andrew, as we wrap up, what do you think we can do to educate more people, to help them understand where and how to safely access this type of therapy, or even access therapists who may be educated and willing to introduce prospective clients to this type of therapy?
Yeah, well, one thing that I'm very proud of, Tom, is the work that Lynnette and I supported with the recent legislation that got passed in Texas, and we think that's a framework that can be used by many other states, and in fact has. That starts to evolve the conversation into different domains, platforms, communities that didn't or wouldn't talk about that before. And so, being agnostic on what side of the aisle one might be on, that was something, at least in Texas, where both sides could agree. We're not happy with the current state of affairs. Science out here is supported. And so we agree, like, let's do this here in Texas. Let's run our own scientific clinical studies, and let's see what type of outcomes are produced. And let's have a conversation after that about what we should do about it. So I think that's one way. Government is slow moving, and for many reasons that can be a good thing. The next thing is, in forums like this or other public forums, podcasts, or documentaries, things of that nature. So I think it's the best of both worlds when you can bring somebody like Lynnette, Dr. Averill's stature here, and she's gifted in communicating advanced neurological concepts down to a level where most people can understand, and then to bring people who have experienced it firsthand, and then talk about the overlap. And then you can frame that into, however you think it should go. Say, okay, well, now we need to think about how we're going to prepare somebody, how we're going to have the experience, how we're going to do integrate, how we're going to do it legally, how we're going to do it federally. That leads to all those conversations. So I think those ways right there are good ways, prominent ways that will lead to this continue. There is momentum now. There's absolutely momentum, and I think the momentum, the train has left the station. So you can't just shut the door on that. It's moving, and so we need to continue to make sure it moves in the right direction. And I think that's the avenues that we're pursuing.
Beautiful. Thank you. I agree with you. The train has left the station for sure, and more people are getting on board. There's sort of a cultural truth or trend. There's obvious access to research. There's awareness that Dr. Averill talked about of the epidemic of stressors and trauma and the crisis level impact of that. And I think more and more people are coming to feel a self-motivation for their own care, their own investigation, willingness to sort of be more than curious and seek out these types of treatments that result in, as you put it, the accidental discovery. Really sounds miraculous. Like it's just, it truly sounds like a miraculous discovery that leads to a miraculous outcome, that leads to the ability to have discussions like this. Thank you all, Dr. Averill, Ethan Abend, Andrew Marr, and our participants for joining us this evening for this discussion. We'll be back here in roughly 2 weeks on May 3rd, talking specifically about another aspect of client preparation or the patient preparation, the evaluation of someone who is considering this type of psychedelic assisted therapeutic experience, how do the medical professionals that represent Beyond and others like Benjamin Malcolm, Dr. Benjamin Malcolm of PharmD and MPH, how do they evaluate and understand the qualifications, the characteristics, the unique circumstances of a patient or client to ensure maximum safety? And that should be another dimension of a very interesting conversation about this entire topic. So with that, I will once again thank the three of you. All three of you strike me as heroes, and for the work you've done, the work you're doing, and the benefits that you're sharing and inspiring all of us. I want to thank our attendees as well. I hope you have a wonderful evening, and we hope to see you back here on May 3rd at 4 p.m. Pacific. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.